Hello out there, all you butt sniffers and butt sniffies, and welcome back to another episode of Philosophy for Dogs. I'm your host, Mickey, here again with my fabulous co-host, the Rocktopus, and today we are joined by a special guest who you can see running in and out. Yes, here we go, Nora. So thank you so much for joining us today as we go for a little walk with Nietzsche and Schopenhauer. You guys want a treat? Yeah? Okay, here you go. There you go. You got a treat. Does that make you happy? Yeah? Are you satisfied? What, you already want another one? You can't be satisfied? That's a good question for Schopenhauer. So if you ask Schopenhauer, no, they can't be satisfied with their treat. His whole idea was that suffering is the norm in life. And so to him, the driving force behind everything is universal will. There's no purpose beyond wanting. And that will and those desires, they represent an absence of something. And that causes pain and that causes suffering. And that suffering can be brought to an end by fulfilling these desires, right? But only temporarily, as we see here. Satisfaction is fleeting, clearly. And any fulfilled desire just makes way for more desires and more pain and suffering. So according to Schopenhauer, you can never be truly satiated, so lasting happiness is impossible. And this is a really important perspective to consider in contrast to everything we've talked about up to this point with different philosophers. It was a totally new perspective at the time it was written, and even now it's pretty far from what's generally understood by the average person today. And it's really interesting to apply it to our own lives, because we can see very clearly how some of Schopenhauer's ideas play out when the treat bag comes out. But what about the other guy, Nietzsche? Got a weird name, right? Well, Nietzsche would actually have a lot of thoughts about the two of them, right? Because a lot of Nietzsche's ideas about where our thoughts on morality came from, come from this division between two types of beings. So sometimes we call them the noble and the herd, and sometimes we call them the birds of prey and the little lamb. But for our purposes today, we're going to call them, all the way up. We're going to call them the big dogs and the little dogs. You okay, baby? So the big dogs and the little dogs. All right, she's gone. Rocky, Nietzsche would look at you and he would see how big you are and how strong you are, and he would say, you're a big dog. And Nora, he would look at you and you're small and sweet and meek, and you would be one of the little dogs. And the big dogs would kind of have power over you and rule over you because of their strength. And until one day you get kind of mad about that, right? Because it doesn't feel good to be ruled over. And you would kind of revolt against the big dogs. And you would actually be able to convince them that all their power and their strength is a sign of their sin and immorality. But Roxy's not going to listen to that because she's so good. The little dogs, they flip this idea of morality and flip this idea of what's good. And then they can take that and claim that all their traits are what make them good by default. So the big dogs are left punishing themselves and repressing their drives, which, what do you know, leads to more suffering. And so while all of us here at Philosophy for Dogs can agree that this is an unfair judgment because dogs of all sizes are good, Nietzsche's thoughts on this are really interesting to consider when we think about cultural and societal views on morality. And we're talking about these two dudes together today because Nietzsche was actually a student of Schopenhauer's. So a lot of Nietzsche's ideas come directly from his interpretations of Schopenhauer's thoughts. And without Schopenhauer's influence, Nietzsche probably would not have developed his ideas in the same way. So both philosophers rejected a lot of what was thought before them. Up until Schopenhauer, other philosophers incorporated a god or a higher power into their belief system, even though that god's role might differ based on who you were talking to. But Schopenhauer and Nietzsche were both atheists, so they totally rejected the idea of God and any meaning associated with that higher power. And the absence of God was a key building block in their belief systems, even though they ended up coming to slightly different conclusions. And self-deception was also something that played fairly heavily into both of their ideas about how people existed. So in Nietzsche's world, it was linked to the inversion of morals, like what we talked about before with the big dogs and the little dogs, and repressed instincts. And for Schopenhauer, self-deception was kind of an inherent part of people's lives in their ideas about suffering versus happiness, and the meaning of things. But Nietzsche and Schopenhauer do have some things that set them apart, even though they do have those similarities. So even though we've seen that they were both atheists and they both rejected the religious doctrine that was kind of the societal norm at the time, and still is, Nietzsche made a lot more room for meaning beyond that doctrine. So rather than throwing out morality with religion, like Schopenhauer did, Nietzsche left a little more room to grow. So Schopenhauer rejected any form of meaning and value of life altogether. But Nietzsche was kind of the optimist to Schopenhauer's pessimist. So he agreed that there can't be any eternal meaning or value, but he didn't reject the possibility of any meaning or value at all. So for Schopenhauer, there's no God, life is meaningless, and death is the best option. But Nietzsche pushed back against that idea with the thought that we have to learn how to find value in life beyond God. And he argued that humans need meaning and that we don't have to be nihilists. So there you have it. Now y'all have a better idea of what's going on with Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. Rocky's trying to get into the treat bag, so we're going to end it right here. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Philosophy for Dogs. Join us again. Never. Have a beautiful day.